There is a race, and I'm making this about an hour after the Phoenix TV coverage went off, and of course a week after the long Daytona 500. But I want to talk about the history of this race with regards to NASCAR, and that's the 1979 Daytona 500. You can find the whole race on YouTube, but whether it still is or not, the DVD was available. I bought it immediately as soon as I learned it was available. I've watched it a couple times. I watched the original race. I know some of you weren't around in 79 or weren't old enough to remember it, but watch a race on YouTube or check Amazon, eBay, or what have you for the 79 Daytona 500. But the implications of how many firsts in that race is unbelievable. Number one, no 500-mile race had ever been televised flag to flag. None. Not Indianapolis, not the old Ontario 500. Ontario, if you don't know, was a carbon copy of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, in existence for about 10 years, closed after 1980, tore down. Terrible waste. Not the old IndyCar 500 miler at Pocono. Yeah, Indy run 500 milers at Pocono back in Triple Crown. Indy 500, Ontario 500, Pocono 500. Plus, USAC had a stock car division that run a 500 miler at Pocono. Matter of fact, after Richard Petty took a NASCAR up there, took his NASCAR ride up there and won it in 73, they scheduled it on the same weekend as Martinsville the next year. So NASCAR sent the farm team up there, and Ron Keselowski, yes, that's Brad's uncle, won the race. But and this predated the Indianapolis 500 being televised by 7 years, live flag to flag. Now ABC, for the 4 or 5 years before 79, had been doing about the last 90 minutes or so of the Daytona 500, last hour to hour and a half of it live. ABC in 1971, and this is on YouTube, televised flag to flag the Greenville 200. Just search Greenville 200. That was back when they run 100-mile races on half-mile tracks. That stopped after 71 when the Winston company come into sponsoring the sport. They went to the longer races, much the schedule we got now. In 1970, and it's on YouTube, half the race from North Wilkesboro, they televised the back half. But that was and another first, pretty much pioneered the use of an in-car camera in a front-running car. In Benny Parsons' MC Anderson Oldsmobile. Back then, the year before, they had just legalized Chevrolet engines for all GM body styles. You had Oldsmobiles, Buicks, even had a few Monte Carlos. Monte Carlos were better on the intermediate and short tracks, but after they outlawed the slope-nosed Laguna S3s after the 77 season, they gave them that. I remember what my dad said when there was controversy back then about the 350 Chevrolet engine coming out in Oldsmobiles, and my dad said back then, they need to shut up, they're getting a better deal. But then, the other first. Young driver out of North Carolina, driving for Rod Osterlund in a blue and yellow number 2 in his very first Daytona 500, off the late model sportsman ranks, rookie year in NASCAR, and he had drove several cup races dating all the way back to the mid-70s in the World 600. And who was this rookie? Dale Earnhardt. That's 3 pretty big firsts for that race. Now, to get to the race itself. Buddy Baker had, much like Denny Hamlin did last week, except for winning the pole. Hamlin didn't win the pole, but Baker did. Won the Bud Shootout, won what at the time was a 125-mile qualifying race. Everybody conceded the race to Baker. But you got to remember, in 73 in the K&K Dodge, and in 78 in the MC Anderson Oldsmobile, Buddy Baker had the engine expire, looking like he was going to win it within the last 10 laps. It's raining. It had rained through the night. Looks like they finally got a chance to go, and they started under what they call a green-yellow situation. The laps count. They actually sent Darrell Waltrip out as a rabbit to test the track, and he came in, talked to NASCAR, his crew chief, Buddy Parrott, come over and talk to him. They finally got full green, and Buddy Baker's car never ran right. They pitted, and finally Baker said it blew up. They said, take it to the garage. They got it back to the shop. One of the crews switched over to the backup ignition system, fired right up and run fine. Nothing wrong with the engine. Ignition problems. The car that had whipped up on everybody. They had put a new engine in for the 500, and apparently something wasn't hooked up right or something. But then as the race gets going, Benny Parsons, carrying that in-car camera, looked like he could be a winner. Let's go back to lap somewhere in the 30s. Bobby and Donnie Allison, two brothers, and Cale Yarborough get together off two and spin down the backstretch. All three sustained damage, got stuck in the mud, but all three were able to continue. All three lost laps. Dale Earnhardt, the rookie, well, Benny Parsons, get back to him a second, actually led the race, looked like he could be a winner until he had hood pin problems and had to make an extra pit stop. At least that's what I believe. They never showed the pit stop on TV. The coverage wasn't as good then as it is now. Benny Parsons looked like he could win the race in that MC Anderson car. Same team that looked like Baker was going to whip the field with him. But he had his problems a little bit earlier. He did finish a race, but had an overheating engine, probably an internal problem, down some cylinders, and finished back. As the race wound down, Cale Yarborough and Donnie Allison had made up their laps. Donnie Allison was leading, Cale Yarborough second, and they had probably a half lap on the field. You did not have the big packs like you do now. This was pre-restrictor plate, carbureted cars. In fact, Junior Johnson even said in an interview with the great Ned Jarrett, Ned Jarrett working the pits, owner of Junior, the owner of Cale Yarborough's car, said he may have to change air cleaner from being wet. The car was missing occasionally. But it cleared up, and as they come off turn 2, after taking the white flag, Cale Yarborough went to the inside of Donnie Allison. I mean, this is replayed to this day. And Donnie Allison threw the block, and they crashed all the way into 3. And as I understand this, and this is unconfirmed, at that time A.J. Foyt was running third. But you got to remember, A.J. Foyt was primarily a USAC driver. Back then, NASCAR raced back to the line under caution. A.J. Foyt backed off. Richard Petty and Darrell Waltrip both went by him. Darrell Waltrip was on 7 cylinders all day. They changed the plugs and everything else, but somehow he hung on to the lead lap. And they went by the crash scene. They come off 4. Darrell Waltrip tried to drive the inside, and I think it was the radio broadcast. I had it on too. Said Petty almost put him on the grass cross line. Petty first, Waltrip second, Foyt third. And as Petty's driving to Victor Lane, there is a fight. And everybody at first thought it was Cale Yarborough and Donnie Allison. Wrong. It was Cale Yarborough and Bobby Allison. Cale poked at Bobby, and Bobby come out, and as Bobby tells it, Cale kept running his fist into his nose. That's his story, and he's sticking to it. But that race, never mind the finish, which was exciting, that race played such an important role in the history of NASCAR. And I know I'm running longer than I'd like to, but if you got time, sit down on YouTube and watch that whole race, or maybe watch an hour and then pause it or whatever, and then go back to where you pick up. It's worth watching if you're new to the sport. It's so much history in a race. I don't think there's another race with that much history in it. Not to mention that Richard Petty had been on what was that time probably the longest losing streak of his career. No wins in 78 except for what they call the Winston West race, I believe, at Phoenix, which did not count in what we now know as Sprint Cup. Yeah, the West Coast boys run Phoenix before the East Coast boys, before the whole NASCAR circuit did. I'm going to hesitate to call them East Coast now, as it's national. But switched from the bulky Dodge Magnum to a Chevrolet, and then brought out an Oldsmobile for the super speedways. And yeah, get a chance, watch the 79 Daytona 500 on YouTube. Order the DVD if you can find it.